You know, I've addressed the school probably hundreds of times, but this time it feels a little bit different for me. Last spring, I started to get really excited about summer break. Although I had lived right outside New York City my entire life, this was going to be the first summer that I'd ever actually lived in Manhattan proper. My parents, my grandparents, even my great-grandparents had all lived in Harlem. But for the very first time, New York City was going to be mine. And I was excited to be able to walk its streets, to go to museums, to eat in restaurants and go to concerts, but most importantly, to reconnect with my family, to walk on the streets where they had lived, to visit the churches where they had been baptized, or funerals had happened, or weddings, to actually sit on the rocks where my grandfather had proposed to my grandmother 70 years ago. This was going to be a summer where I was going to discover my personal story, reconnect with my New York story and my history, and I couldn't wait to get started. But something happened along the way. Almost immediately, actually immediately, I landed in John F. Kennedy Airport. My father took me to my apartment on the Upper West Side. I unpacked my things and I went to walk up the street to get some groceries, and this is what I saw. Yogurt was invented 5,000 years ago by Arabic merchants outside Pinkberry on the Upper West Side. I was like, that's kind of cool, and I had my phone, I took a picture of it, went about my business. The very next day, I'm walking up Broadway, I see Haddad, the can-do people. And I'm like, Haddad is an Arab name. That is really cool. And I wonder if the Haddads I know are related to the Haddads that make portable toilets in New York City. Mom, is that your cousin? The very next day, this is all true. I get on my bicycle, I'm going down the Greenway on the Hudson River along the west side of Manhattan to one of my favorite spots, which is right along the harbor, and I see a giant ood that apparently has been there for 15 years. I had never noticed it before. It's giant. These are people. That's the Statue of Liberty. I had missed it for 15 years. That weekend, Miss Ream and I were walking along the High Line, which is an abandoned elevated train track on the west side of Manhattan. It's a beautiful path the way. And right over here is 10th Avenue. And I look up and I see this. And I said, Miss Ream, can you translate that for me? And she said, sure. This book belongs to its owner, Paul God. He bought it with his own money at the beginning of March 1892. And I'm like, Miss Ream, I am so in awe and jealous of your ability to translate. And she said, you idiot. It's in English. But I looked up what this meant. This is from a French artist who has been using outdoor art installations to bring about the story of politically oppressed people. In occupied Palestine, there are 600,000 books that were found. 6,000 are currently in Tel Aviv, under the category of AP, abandoned property. And he saw this there, and he saw this inscription in the inside cover, and he said, I am going to paint it on buildings that will allow it to happen, to show that Arabs had lived in Palestine prior to 1948. And his installation is still there in New York City. He did it in London and in Beirut. I began to see Egypt everywhere. This is 1 block from my apartment. These columns remind me of Luxor. Look, little pharaohs on top of buildings I had never noticed before. It looks like Ramses II tomb. Another building. You can tell that this is from the Muslims who had lived in Spanish. This is up in the cloisters. And then I began to listen to podcasts. And the first podcast I listened to was about Cleopatra's Needle. Cleopatra's Needle is this obelisk. It's a pear. It was originally in Luxor by Thutmose III. It had been moved, it had been pillaged by the Persians, and then found and discovered by the Romans, and then moved up to Alexandria. At the turn of the century, Egypt needed some money. They sold one to London, one to New York, and it's in Central Park. And I began reading, I found it really interesting that this 3,500-year-old antiquity from the Middle East is in public display in New York City. So I began to read about it, and it said that it was the oldest antiquity, but that the second oldest public antiquity in New York, guess where it's from? Jordan. In 1964, 65, New York City held the World's Fair. The late King Hussein gifted a column of Jerash to New York City, and it's still there today. Now, what's really interesting about this, and it has a little tie to my family history, I will tell you that when you walk, anyone fly out of Kennedy Airport from here, you see a big giant globe on the way out. Well, look the next time. You can't miss it. As my mom and I were walking towards it, it was as though Jordan was speaking to us. This is how we were walking. That's my mom. She took her senior year picture in 1965 there. And so it was really nice to go back with her daughter, me, and stand where she had stood when she was just 18 years old. That's the only selfie I've ever taken in my life. But, of course, I had to do some research about this column. And Jordan was one of 36 countries to have pavilions in the World's Fair. They had the Dead Sea Scroll, they had Kanafe, they had Mansal, they had mosaics, and of course the great column. But what caused a great controversy was there was text inside the pavilion that said Jordan had to be mindful of the aggression of its neighbors, and that land should be, politics should be self-determined by the people occupying that land. That caused tremendous controversy. That's all that it said. And it actually ended up being the most visited pavilion of the 1964-65 World's Fair. In fact, my parents, who were dating at the time, were 17 and 18, went to that pavilion. Little did they know their daughter would be working in that very country some 50 years later. I encourage you to go out and see it. That same day, I take my mom home. I wanted to see my father. We're sitting having coffee. And I asked my dad, what is the school down the block? 2 blocks from where we grew up. 2 blocks. How's PS 28? What is it like? He said, it's not called PS 28 anymore. It's called Khalil Gibran School. He said, he's a poet, right? I said, yes, he is a poet. And so we walked down and I took a picture of it, of all the thousands of names it could be. The school closest to where I grew up was Khalil Gibran. Now, I get on the train that night to go home. I get out of the subway. This was a little weird. The quote on the floor that someone had put in chalk was from Khalil Gibran. The city was talking to me in an entirely different way. Mosques that I had never noticed before were there. This one is up. This one is huge. It's up on the 96th Street on the east side. This one's on the lower east side. This one is 2 blocks from my house on the upper west side. This one is down in the West Village. Food. New York is obsessed with falafel. You can't go anywhere without getting falafel. And of course, shawarma. The main difference is that if you want fries, it's $7.75 as opposed to 50 piastres here. So I didn't have any falafel in New York City. Halal food trucks on almost every corner with Arabic written in it. I had never noticed it before. Well, of course, our halal guys. Palestine was on the tongue of every New Yorker this summer. The tides have changed. The protests were huge. Tens of thousands of people, not just Arabs, were marching in the street. The conversation was not just about what was happening in Gaza, but what was the U.S. doing about it. Now this picture, I happen to be in Midtown Manhattan. This is behind Bryant Park. The New York Public Library is right over here. And I see this very large demonstration. And I didn't take the picture, I didn't have my camera that day. I took it from somebody else. And these are 10,000 Hasidic Jews. Do you know what they're protesting?
Against
Which side?
Palestine.
Look what it says. Israel is a Zionist state, not a Jewish state. The Zionist state ruthlessly ignores basic human rights. A completely different perspective than I think most of the world would have on this particular population. I just happened to come upon this that day. This picture was sent to me 3 days ago from one of my friends. A huge demonstration for Palestine had taken across the Brooklyn Bridge. He said it was amazing. There were tens of thousands of people. They had unfurled Palestinian flags over the Brooklyn Bridge. He said it was quite a powerful story. Things that I had always noticed and loved and cherished began to look different to me this summer. These are the New York City subway mosaics. They're my favorite kind of art of New York City. But now when I look at them, I think of Manawal, and I think of the history here and the means of communication that are here. So these are just some of streets that I went through throughout the summer, and I love this one. This is in Canal Street, and you can't really tell, is it a mosque or is it a church? Saudi flag. Hey. Yeah. Walking across Central Park to go home. This had been the Plaza Hotel, it's now the Fairmont Hotel. For important guests, they hang the flag of your nationality. So somebody from India and somebody from Saudi were there. But this had happened all the time. Prior to me being here, I wouldn't have recognized the Saudi flag. In the subway, we saw this health craze coming 1,000 years ago. Hummus. Walking down Columbus Avenue, coming for a Dead Sea treatment. No, thank you, I'll go to the real thing. But this is what changed it. Does anyone know this building? The Empire State Building, perhaps the most iconic building of New York City. This is in Lake July. Does anybody know, anyone want to gather why it's colored this way? I told you that. So, the person I was with, he knew that I was all into New York City history and doing my thing, and I just said 3 days prior that the Empire State Building could light up into 17,000 different color combinations. And they would either have the traditional white or different colors, depending on the holiday or festivities or games or whatever. Then it always had to have a reason. So I looked really hard and I said, I recognize that green. I've seen that green many, many, many times. He said, what do you think it's for? And I said, it's for Eid. And he said, what's Eid? And I explained to him what Eid is. And he said, no way. And so he looked it up on his iPhone, and sure as heck, New York City had lit up its most iconic building as a giant minaret to celebrate the first day of Eid. That's my city. Without me trying, without me looking for anything, just popping up. Do you want to see what happens when you go out and try and find things in New York City about the culture here? Get ready. King's Highway. Not exactly as beautiful as the King's Highway from Manawal to the Dead Sea. It had been for King George III back in Revolutionary times. It's a bit run down now. But I went out to the subway station just to get the picture anyway, because I thought about it here. But then we just began to walk around. Restaurants, delis, building consultants, barbershops. I didn't think I did that. Just remember me. All right? Coffee. Tell me the sign couldn't be found in Manawal. Right? Have you not seen the sign? Right? Honey. All different kinds of food. Again, then we're going to get into Lebanese. Lots of Yemeni restaurants as well. Of course, all of your hijab needs, right? Really fun places. And active community, not small. And by the way, I could have showed, now, you can tell this is New York, because New York apparently thinks Dubai is known for its chicken. I've been to Dubai. Dubai is not known for its chicken. You can also tell it's New York, because right next to the Islamic bookshop is an Irish bar. Ms. Reed said this is a very sunny sign. Apparently, it's #2 halal Chinese kitchen. Again, very, very New York kind of restaurant. We went to Novelist. Where's Ustaz Majid? See here, I hope. We went to Novelist Bakery and had kanafe that tastes exactly like it does here. So all over the city, we could find it. This is not in just one area. We went past Seatown. Ms. Reed said, take the picture. The kid, Seatown, just like in Oman. I said, Ms. Reed, when I went to Jordan, I looked at Seatown and I'm like, just like it is in New York. It's a different perspective, different stories, same object. Then we went in. The food, exactly the same. right? We could get anything you wanted. It was like being in Safeway or Target One or Cosmo. And then I went down to Lower Manhattan because then I felt this pull. And I wanted to know the names of the 2 Jordanians who were killed in 9/11. And I went down and I had to do some research, but I discovered it. And I happen to love this memorial that New York has done. And I found their names, and when I looked and saw that it was Duani, I said, I know that family. I've met their family. I've actually eaten at their house. I had no idea that they had lost somebody in the attacks. So this summer, I went to my hometown to discover a story, and I found a very, very different story. That by living here, by walking among you, by listening to your stories, the language, the culture, the food, the people, the politics, the fight is now part of my story. Working here and living in Jordan has given me a kind of intellectual currency that allowed me to communicate very differently with my hometown. I have lived in New York for 40 years and had never noticed any of these things. By listening to your stories, it has become part of my story. I am richer for it, I am smarter for it, and I am very, very grateful for it. So, this year, I'll just end with this one. This picture is me walking through Terminal 8 at Kennedy Airport. Had never noticed the Jordanian flag before. Had never noticed. And I said, oh, as I was coming back to Jordan, this is my last scene with New York. So I hope for us this year, and I mean this with utmost sincerity, that you ask each other and communicate with each other in deep ways. So here's to a year of asking great questions, to a year of deep listening, and to a year of excellent storytelling. Thank you.